G'day guys, welcome back to a new episode of the Boundary Riders podcast, episode 96, and today we have a lot to talk about. First of all, we're going to be taking a look at quite a few pre-season injuries that have occurred over the past week or so. We'll be taking a look at a couple of pods or players of difference that are in AFL Fantasy for 2025, and I will be making my predictions for the breakout players for every single club going into this season. But let's not waste any more of your time, let's roll the intro and get straight into it. And then Reagan from the pocket, don't tell me, Isaac Reagan!
Yeah.
He's just got the license for a brothel.
Well, I think Gather Round's going to be more than just AFL this next season.
It's at the handle at the back, Nick Dacos to get the pies home! He's done it! So I'm sure you guys are all aware by now that my brother's not here. He obviously isn't in the podcast today. He's got work, so obviously he's got priorities, which is very disappointing. I've told him that, and he's on thin ice. He's on thin ice if he's going to be coming back to the podcast, I'm going to be honest. But of course, we've got our episode today, and what I'll quickly say right now, because that we are live, channel members can watch the Boundary Riders podcast live. This is the first episode we have live stream. We're going to be doing that for members, so if you want to become a channel member, the link is down below. You have a bunch of exclusive perks. My favourite perk is got to be the members vote, so we've talked about that previously, so I won't really get too much into it, but if you want to go check that out, the link is down below, and you will be able to watch the podcast live every single week, and will be released at least a couple of days early for other people to see. But first of all, I think, like I said, we'll be going over the pre-season injuries, because we have seen a little bit of carnage over the last couple of weeks, over the last week or so for a few teams, especially Fremantle, but we'll kind of go as like a timeline. I've kind of got a couple of screenshots here of injuries that have happened. I've kind of got a little bit of like, try to keep them in order of how they've happened basically over the last week or so. First of all, from Fremantle, Nat Fyfe has undergone arthroscope on his right knee, so it's undergone some sort of surgery. I don't know what it is. Sorry, I'm not a doctor. If you're shocked, I understand. But he's done this to be better prepared for the 2025 season. To have surgery this close to, I don't know if it's much of like a serious surgery, I don't know, but to have something done to your knee this close to the season, like we're under 2 months away from the season beginning. It just seems very close. So interesting to see if Nat Fyfe will be there for round one for the Dockers, along with Michael Walters. He had a similar procedure over the Christmas break and has recovered well. So it looks like Michael Walters will be a little bit more in consideration for that round one spot. But Fremantle do have a couple of really good forwards coming through, and looks like their pre-season is chugging along nicely. So it'll be interesting to see if Michael Walters is in that 23 lineup when they first, when round one teams are announced and how good a pre-season he can have. Now, a really tragic one is Christian Petrarca. He has sustained a cracked rib at Melbourne training throughout I think it was Friday morning. The Demons are yet to put a timeline on when he's returned, but it's still another setback after his cracked ribs, of course, throughout. I think it was Queen's birthday, the game was. So that's really disappointing. He's cracked his rib. I'm unsure the severity of it. I still don't think they've actually revealed it. This is Monday when I'm recording, so I'm unsure what's going to happen there. But Christian Petrarca doing a rib injury, they're going to take that very, very cautiously. So, probably more cautious than an AFL club really would, I think, especially being Melbourne. They're going to be so cautious about this. But yeah, Christian Petrarca done a cracked rib. I'd be surprised now if he may be right for round one, but at what quality, I don't really know. Nick Dacos is dealing with a plantar fascia and has been on a modified training schedule. He's reduced his riding, and he was reduced to riding a stationary bike for Collingwood training. So I don't think that's too much of a concern, but a foot injury, especially for a guy like Nick Dacos, that could be an issue. I feel like that's okay. It seems like he's just being on light duty, so the quality that he is, I'm sure he'll be okay. But that's just another injury, and Nick Dacos, he's probably Collingwood's most important player this year. So if he's out for an extended period of time, they want to take this very cautiously. So I think it's all good. I don't think there's going to be too many concerns there for Collingwood, but just to wait and see. And a couple from today, Monday, when recording, Luke Ryan was walked off the ground early in their match simulation and after a huge collision. So that's not great news for Luke Ryan. I'm hoping it's just, at worst, just a little bit of a head knock. And I mean, honestly, not that that's good, but let's hope it's not too serious. Let's hope he hasn't done anything bad, like broken jaw or something. Hopefully he's okay. But yeah, that's not good news for Luke Ryan. He's very important for the Dockers this year. And then recently just came out, I think it's only a couple of hours ago, Todd Marshall has ruptured his Achilles tendon. So Port Adelaide have only said that he's going to be sidelined for an extended period. That's very vague. My brother's already written off Port Adelaide's season, so he's very confident in Port Adelaide this year. But Todd Marshall being out, I think he's definitely been down the last couple of years. He obviously burst onto the scene a couple of years ago with a 50-plus goal year. He's been pretty injury-prone the last couple of years. So for Todd Marshall to be out now, that's going to be really concerning for Port Adelaide. And I've just realised I haven't had my mic here with me the whole time. But anyway, doesn't matter. And finally, I wanted to talk about Sid Draper. So Jordan Dawson recently had an interview with I think it's the Advertiser or Sports News. I think that's the Advertiser. He said that he's only 18, has had a few issues with his body, so they've actually brought him into the main group slowly. So I still personally think that Sid Draper will be playing round 1. That's my thoughts. I don't think they're going to be... I feel like this kid's done enough in his pre-season, and they've got so much high hopes for him that he'll be there when the whips are cracking, when the season starts for the Crows. But for fantasy-wise and for Adelaide Crows fans, just maybe a wait and see. This kid's going to be a gun. I don't think anyone really has a point to say against him like that. He seems like a real professional already at the age of 18. So I don't think there's many concerns over, what this guy, the professionalism of this kid. But maybe just wait and see AFL fantasy wise, and maybe we'll have to wait a few weeks into the season before we see Sid Draper line up in the, I don't want to say the tricolours, bro, in the Crows colours. Before we get into the AFL fantasy stuff, I really wanted to take a look at this interview with Matt Owies. So I don't know if all of you have seen this, but some of you may have, and I honestly think it is one of the most... I think Matt Owies could be my new favourite player. I don't really dislike Carlton, at all. I really like Carlton... I don't really dislike Carlton at all. They're not really a team that I really look at. I don't know if it's a bad thing to say. I don't really care. That's just me. I'm they're not like a team that I hate. They're not a team that I really like. They're kind of in the middle. Anyway, he's obviously moved to the West Coast Eagles over the off-season, and he had an interview with some girl. Apparently, she just was making a TikTok and brought up a question to him, asking him about his favourite shapes flavour, and then said to Matt Owies if he could say hello to her friend who was a Carlton supporter. So I'll play the clip in a sec. We'll see if anyone's too concerned by it. So this is what Matt Owies had to say to a West Coast fan.
Matt Owies here today. What's your favourite shapes flavour?
Shapes flavour? I don't really eat them, but pizza.
Pizza? Also, can you please say hi to my friend Isla? She loves Carlton.
I'm sure you heard that. Now, that was disturbing vision there of Matt Owies saying something so horrible. He said, fuck Carlton. I know the horror. I get it. If you're a Carlton fan and you had any sort of bad feelings towards that, a player that you got rid of, saying that about your club, harden the fuck up. Fuck me. I'm not someone to say, oh, the fucking snowflake bullshit, but come on. He got fired, basically. He was going to get delisted. I feel like he was going to get delisted. I'm pretty sure that's the case. He was going to get delisted from Carlton, and they didn't want him, so he decided to move clubs. Basically was unwanted, and basically his job was, in the crossroads for a while. People were saying no one really wanted him for a while. There was news stories coming out that he wanted $800K a year, which turned out to be bullshit. And now he comes out and basically says, fuck Carlton. Sorry, bro. If you're a Carlton fan, I'd understand if I was a Sydney fan and someone said, fuck Sydney. Look, I'm not going to be thrilled about it, but I'm also not going to sit there and have a fucking whinge and be like, oh, I hate Matt Owies. How unprofessional is that? Shut up, bro. Are you telling me sitting there saying that, you've never left a job you hated, and you've never thought to say that to your boss that you left from? You've had a shit job, you've never thought to say, fuck you, or fuck that place. You're telling me that you've had all those sort of experiences, or let's say you have had that sort of experience. You're telling me that you couldn't see yourself saying that to your former job place that you hated? Like, come on. Like, get over it. It's not that big a deal. And so many people in the comments that are like Carlton supporters are like, I never liked Matt Owies anyway. He sucked. Oh, I'm so happy that he left. He was clearly hated us from the beginning. It's like, bro, no, he didn't. He wanted to stay there. The only reason why he left is because you wouldn't fucking sign the poor bastard. Anyway, let's take a look at the best pods for AFL Fantasy in 2025. So if you don't know what a pod is, basically it's a player of difference. A player that isn't really popular to pick from. Sort of like a diamond in the rough, I would say. But I wanted to go through, I think I've got 9 listed here. And I think I've got like 3 from different price ranges. I've got 3 that are like the top end between about whatever the top price is and 800k. I've got 3 players under 800k to about 450, and then I've got 450 to basement to whatever it is, 230, I think it is. So I've got 9 players here to take a look at. First of all is the most expensive POD. Basically, what I class as someone who is a player of difference is someone that is owned by less than 6% of the people playing it throughout the year. This is quite early on, so people are obviously going to get different players and whatever. But I think there's still a pretty good indicator. We're about a month in from people doing it. I don't think a player is going to be massively got unless someone gets injured in the off season or in the pre-season from now. So first of all, the most expensive player I have here who is under 6% ownership is Max Gawn. $1.15 million. So very expensive. I think he's one of the most expensive ruckmen. However, I think this guy is ready for a massive season again. Yes, there is some concern over the fact that he did have a weird injury. He had an injury to his voice box in the preseason. But this guy, throughout the majority of the second half of 2024, played through injury. He was playing like a mummy half the time. He had so much strapping on his body that he was hardly getting through games. People were saying it was like borderline abusive to keep him playing out there. It was really mean to have Melbourne to keep him out there. And he still averaged over 110. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't think a voice box is going to keep Max Gawn out of round 1. I don't think it's going to be that bad. Now, to be honest, I think the majority of the reason why his voice box hurt is because of the amount of interviews he had to do throughout the season, trying to put out every single spot fire that all the other Melbourne players are doing. So I think Max Gawn, he's only owned by 5.5% at this stage. I think he's in for a great year for Melbourne. I would not have too many concerns about picking him up. Now, you've obviously got a lot of players that are around that mark, like Cherry, Marshall, English as well is a pretty good talking point at this stage. But if you want to go for someone a little bit different, I think Max Gawn's a good person to put down. Next player here, $841 is his price. It's Trent Rivers. He's owned by 2.1%. He's a defensive midfielder. If he gets midfield minutes, especially now with the news that Christian Petrarca could be missing some of the early parts of the season, Trent Rivers moved into the midfield for the Demons last year. I think he's going to get some midfield minutes. I think he's a good user. He gives a little bit of difference on the fact that Petrarca, Oliver, Viney, a lot more stoppage players. Rivers has a little bit more class, a little bit more polish, and I think that Melbourne can use that going into the season. So I think Rivers is actually a very good choice. Now, again, you do have players around that mark. You have Jaden Short, McKercher, Mills. These are the players that a lot of people are picking from. But if you want to pick someone different, I think Trent Rivers is a good choice in your defensive midfield plays. I think this guy could have a bit of a year like... trying to think of someone that... obviously he went forward, but Isaac Heaney could have that sort of year. I think... this is obviously... I'm not comparing him to Nick Dacos, but the fact that he can play defensive, but also get a lot of touches. I feel like they want to get the ball in his hands, Trent Rivers, especially when they have so many issues up forward, Melbourne. I think that if they've got better distributors like a Trent Rivers getting it into that forward line, I think that they'll be looking for him more to get the footy. So that's why I'm kind of looking at Trent Rivers. I actually maybe go pick him up. I don't have him at this stage, but I think he's a good choice to look at. Next one, and I think this guy's very much flown under the radar. He moved clubs in the off-season. Alex Neil-Bullen. 8.11 is his price. A forward midfielder. Obviously, he was at Melbourne last year. He's moved to the Adelaide Crows. He's owned by 1.1%. This seems extremely low for a forward. Now, I think you watch this. I don't think you dive straight in right now. If you see or hear news that Alex Neil-Bullen is playing midfield for the Adelaide Crows, I think you lock him in. I think that they've got players that they've brought in like James Peatling and that. They may give some minutes to players like Isaac Rankin as well. But I think Alex Neil-Bullen brings a little bit more toughness to that midfield group for the Crows. I think that he wants midfield minutes, and if he's averaging 90 to 100, I see he can do that. But this is on the this is a caveat to this. He has to be playing midfield. If he's playing far forward or whatever, I would avoid. But he's a very similar price to Isaac Rankin. He's $8.15, I believe, Isaac Rankin. So he's $4K less. So I'd be watching the preseason of Alex Neil-Bullen. 8.11 is price. That's not that bad, really. Forward line, it's kind of puzzle pieces. You can basically, there's a couple that you basically have to pick from, but I think you can kind of switch and swap a couple. And I think Alex Neil-Bullen could be someone that you could pick from. Now, under 800K, the first player I've got, no one is owning this guy. He was one of the highest priced forwards last year. Had a pretty poor season in 2024, but the quality of this guy, I think he can bounce back. Toby Green, 751. He's owned by 0.75%. He's a straightforward. Was one of the best forwards in 2023, like I said. I think he averaged nearly 100, especially, he was definitely over 90. Had quite a poor 2024. So I can't see him having another poor year. He's the captain of the Giants. When he was, in the finals, in that final against Brisbane, he really stood up. He stood up at stages, but when he tapered off, the Giants really fell off in that second half. I think Toby Green is a real watch, a real wait and see. He's getting a little bit older now, but I think if he has a good couple of games to start the season, or you want someone a little bit different, someone around that price where you got McRae, you can look at this. I think it's a wait and see, but 751 for the quality of a guy who could average over 100 or at least over 90 at his quality. He's a guy who's prone to getting 20 touches and 2 or 3 goals a game. This guy's been All-Australian a couple of times. I think Toby Green had a very down year in 2024. I think if you are going to get him as well, I think he's good for at least a price jump of maybe 100K mid to early season. I think by at least, maybe round 7 or 8, I think that he could be up, 800, 900K. So it's a wait and see, but I do like Toby Green at this stage. Next, we've got 671. He's a forward midfielder, plays for St Kilda. This is Darcy Wilson. 2.3% ownership, so not owned by a lot of people. Now, we did talk about him when we were looking at our mid-price players to look at. I don't mind Darcy Wilson here. He's not owned by many people. The problem is that Filippo probably takes that spot from people in fantasy because he's cheaper. He seems to have had a really good preseason. But I would just keep an eye on Darcy Wilson early, especially in preseason games. You obviously got the match simulation coming up, and then you've got the preseason game. I don't know who St Kilda play, but just keep an eye on Darcy Wilson because he's a runner. He'll run all day. He's durable. He played in the majority of the games for St Kilda last year, and he's such a good runner, player on the wing. I think that's his role moving forward. I think he'll take over from Brad Hill in the future. So I think he's very much a wait and see. And that forward line, like I said, you can kind of experiment there. So I think Darcy Wilson's a real look at. After that, we have Riley Sanders from the Western Bulldogs. 656 in price. Owned a little bit more than a couple of I've mentioned previously. 5.8, so he's starting to move up a little bit. Forward midfielder, though, I think very much a wait and see. But with McRae leaving and Daniel leaving, there's a position move into the midfield. They lost a couple of midfielders in the last couple of off-seasons. You think of Dunkley and the likes. So there could be a spot for a young midfielder to get a couple of games. I think that Riley Sanders is one to just keep an eye on. Could potentially get some midfield minutes. And he played in and out of the team last year. So 656 is pretty decent for a guy who was got subbed out in games. So just there's a lot of potential here for Sanders. So just keep an eye on him. Now, the last couple I want to take a look at, these guys are all priced under 450K. First of all is Nathan O'Driscoll. This guy probably isn't talked about enough. He's owned by 4.1%. He's a straight midfielder. So a little bit of a wait and see. Plays for Fremantle if you don't know. Best on-ground performance in the 2024 Peel Thunder Premiership win. So in the Waffle. I think this kid's ready to go in 2025. This guy's had huge raps on him in the pre-season for Fremantle. I think he was played a lot of midfield in his match simulation recently. I think they're going to try and get youth through that midfield for Fremantle. You've got the likes of Brayshaw, Young, who's going to be playing a little bit more forward, I think, this year as well. You also got Sarong as well. But I think that O'Driscoll could be potentially moving into that lineup. There've been talks that he's in their best 23. So I think just look at him. He's priced at 441, so that's very low. If he can average around 65, 70, maybe even 80, 80 may be a bit much. But if he can average that, he's looking around 600k, and then eventually you can upgrade from that around that 6 to 8 round mark. Another one here is Jack Carroll, 411, 0.8% ownership forward midfielder. Is at the Saints. He played for Carlton last year before getting delisted. St Kilda took the chance on him. I really liked the look of this guy when he played for Carlton last year. Now, a lot of the time he played as the sub. I wouldn't be locking this one in by any means. But again, wait and see. Watch his pre-season. See if he gets games for St Kilda in the match simulation in the pre-season games. If he does, then potentially use this guy. I think he's a good user. He's a good runner. He's plays into that St Kilda game plan that played, towards the end of last season, not the start of the season. The start of the season was woeful. But I think that this guy could have a good season. I just keep an eye on him. I'm not locking him in, but just keep an eye on Jack Carroll. And then finally, Caden Cleary. If you've watched the podcast before or listened to me talk, I've sang my raps around this kid for quite a while. He's a Sydney Swan, 244 price, 2.4% ownership. He is a straightforward, but showed signs late last year for the Swans that he had some good forward nous. Now, as a small forward, Sydney kind of need that, I think. Tom Papley hard carries that small forward line with Will Hayward. I think they need that third guy. And I think late in the season when Tom Papley was injured, I felt like this guy had some skill. Now, he got taken out in the final series, which is sort of fair enough. I actually thought he should have been playing in the final series, but I understand why he was taken out. But I think there is a role for a small forward for Sydney this year. Wait and see if he's in the team. He had a good 2K time trial a couple of months ago. So this is like when the rookies returned. So he's got some good running. He's got running his legs. He had a couple of good games for the Swans last year. Sydney usually try to get some games into young kids throughout a couple of seasons before they get them playing full games. I think there's a spot for him. Now, this is a wait and see, but just keep your eyes peeled on Caden Cleary. But guys, those are my pods for AFL Fantasy in 2025. I'll quickly list them again if you have forgotten. Max Gawn, first of all, is the most expensive pod I have seen, which is most relevant, I believe. Trent Rivers at 841. Alex Neil-Bullen at 811. Toby Green at 751. Darcy Wilson at 671. Riley Sanders at 656. Nathan O'Driscoll at 441. Jack Carroll at 411. And Caden Cleary at 244. But now, let's move on and talk about every club's breakout player in 2025. So, last week we went through some awards that... the player awards going into 2025. We talked about the Boundary Riders medal, the Brownlow medal, Coleman, Rising Star, and I think we talked about a couple of other things as well. But I thought today, we did this last year, and I think I got a couple right, and I think my brother did as well. But we're going to be taking a look at the breakout player at every single club. So a player that really hasn't been noticed, really hasn't been seen, but I think in 2025, these guys are going to explode. They're going to be on the scene. Everyone's going to see them. These are the guys to watch. So I'm going to list the club and the player first, and then we'll talk about a couple of them in specifics. So for Adelaide, I've picked Riley Thilthorpe. For Brisbane, Kitty Coleman. Carlton, Ollie Hollins. Collingwood, Ed Allen. Essendon, Nate Caddy. Fremantle, Nathan O'Driscoll. Geelong, Toby Conway. Gold Coast, Bailey Humphrey. GWS, Lee Kalia. Hawthorn, McDonald. North Melbourne, McKercher. Port Adelaide, Burgoyne. Richmond, Tom Brown. St Kilda, Mateus Filippo. Sydney, Caden Cleary. West Coast, Harley Reid. And then Western Bulldogs, Riley West. So, I think there's a couple that are kind of self-explanatory. I think that players like Coleman and Thilthorpe, considering they had a lot of injuries throughout last year. Obviously, Coleman had that ACL and Phil Thorpe missed the majority of the season through injury. That I think they're pretty self-explanatory. I think a lot of people said that they were going to break out in 2024. So I think these guys, I don't think I have to explain them. But I'll go through a couple. So first of all, I want to take a look at Ollie Hollands at Carlton because people may not really be following his pre-season or may not have talked about Ollie Hollands much. He's shown some good signs as a wingman for Carlton, but there's been talk that he's going to be moving the halfback for Carlton this year. And I think this is a great move. He's going to get more of the footy. He's already shown that he's a great runner. I think this guy should be a much watch. I think with his new role playing in defence, I think he's going to get more of the footy, more notice, and I think that he's ready to go. I think that Carlton rely a little bit too much on players like Sard and Newman. I don't think they have a lot of youth back there. So I think that Ollie Hollands is ready to go. I think this is a much-watch player going into 2025. Ed Allen for Collingwood. Now, Collingwood's kind of hard because a lot of the players that could be breaking out or whatever had a lot of down years last year. Like I thought of maybe picking Lachie Schultz, but I thought maybe pick someone a little bit younger. So Ed Allen was a player that caught my eye. Now, I think that Collingwood are going to pick some younger players around the mark if they have spots available throughout the season. Ed Allen played a couple of games last year for Collingwood, but he's basically the pick of the bunch of the young players for the Pies. I expect him to get games throughout the season, and I think that this guy is going to be someone to watch. I think he's a good midfielder that Collingwood want to build around. So hopefully he gets some games. I don't know if he's going to get the games though. This is the problem, and it's going to be hard to see if Collingwood get players this year who are going to break through and who are the breakout players, especially if they are young. I think there may be a couple of seniors, like maybe Lachie Schultz, who had a pretty poor year last year, but I think Ed Allen's the one I'm going to watch for Collingwood. Now, the Gold Coast, I've picked Bailey Humphrey. Now, he admitted last year that he was trying to live up to the comparisons of him and Dusty Martin, which he said he's learned from that. He's had a good pre-season for the Gold Coast. He was one player that had the second-year blues, and I think he's one to watch. I think he's shown some good signs throughout his short career so far. I like the look of him. I think he uses the ball pretty well. He's a tough player. He's got a good goal sense. So I think he can play around that forward line for the Gold Coast. I think that small forward, like hybrid forward, I think that's a Gold Coast position that can be filled by him. So I think that's where he's going to improve this year. On the Giant, Lika Lear, the fact that Haynes has left the club, I think he'll get his shot now. You've got a couple of other ones there, Himmelberg, who may lock him out of that spot. But I think that Lee Lear's ready to go. If he gets his spot in there for the Giants, I think that there's a spot for him. And he showed some signs last year when Taylor was injured that he's got some good knowledge of playing defence for the Giants. So I think he's good to see. Now, McDonald for Hawthorn, I think this guy's ready to explode after some more experience in the seniors in 2024. I think this guy could be one of their best players going into this year. I think he played quite more half forward for Hawthorn. Wasn't really talked about as much as like a Ginnivan or whatever, but he has a lot of personality. I think he's going to be one of the favourites of Hawthorn, especially their younger supporter base that they're starting to grow now. And I think this guy's ready for a big season. I think he's going to get a little bit more midfield time for Hawthorn, and I think he's got good goal sense, which is really good for a young guy. But I think I think you get more midfield minutes this year, and I think that he's ready to go. Now, Burgoyne. So for Port Adelaide, I think if anyone saw the semi-final from Jace Burgoyne, I think a lot of you would realise why he's on this list. But yeah, his semi-final playing off halfback, the fact that Dan Houston has left now, I think that he's going to get that role. He's a good user, good runner. And I've said that about a couple of players now, but Jace Burgoyne, I think he's in for a massive year for Port Adelaide. And he's always been in the shadow of his father, and I think it's his uncle in Sean Burgoyne, but I think he's ready to go. He just needs to bulk up a little bit. He's a stringy footballer. He's very lanky. So if we can build his body just a little bit, get those 25 touches a game, what Dan Houston was doing, this guy could be a huge bolter this year. Could be one of the best breakout players for the 2025. Richmond, Tom Brown. Now, Richmond, it's hard to say who's going to be the breakout player. You could pick a bunch of them. Kane McAuliffe was one that I thought of as well. But Tom Brown, there's been so many exits in that area. This guy is expected to go back in 2025. A lot of people, he's played a little bit of wing, a little bit of everywhere, but he's had great skills, and a lot of Tigers fans, from my understanding, are really keen on this guy. So I think he's going to get a good run of form. Like, he's going to get games you would expect as long as he's having decent form in the preseason and stuff. This guy's going to going to get games. So I think Tom Brown's in for a big year for Richmond, and we'll just have to wait and see, really. I mean, the Tigers could have anyone, really. Now, Harley Reid, it may be a bit of an interesting choice, saying that he's going to be a breakout player, because obviously the guy everyone expects is going to be like massive. Obviously, Harley Reid, everyone loves him. Everyone thinks that he's going to be the next Chris Judd or whatever. But I think he had some downtimes last year, especially when he started to get like tagged. I think as long as he builds his body, as long as he can like hold up to the rigors of playing midfield minutes for an AFL club, because he did have times last year when he just couldn't run out games and had to be moved forward. But if he can spend 80% of time in the midfield and then 20% up forward, I think he's in for a big year. I mean, maybe a big call, maybe too much of a call, maybe a real hot take. But I can see him being top 3 in the best and fairest for West Coast in 2025 if he can play those midfield minutes. So I think Harley Reid's in for a big year. Another one who comes to mind is Elijah Hewitt for West Coast, but I've taken a big leap of faith and I've picked Harley Reid. And finally, for the Western Bulldogs, I've picked Riley West. So he was fighting for this spot for me with Riley Sanders. The reason why I've picked West here is because I think he has a point to prove. The fact that he wasn't in that team in the final, I think they picked James Harms over him. I believe that was there was a big talking point. The fact that he wasn't in the team for the Bulldogs. I think this guy's got Toby Green aspects about him, but he just doesn't get a good run of it, and he's not consistent enough. I think with a good pre-season, the fact that McRae has left, the fact that Daniel has left, the fact that they were just chucking these these midfielders or defenders like Daniel into that forward line just to get them to fill spots in their team, I think just don't worry about it. They need to actually get actual forward-crafted players. Cody Waitman needs to have a good year as well. But with them guys leaving and so much reliance on the key 3, you got Darcy, Norton, Ugle-Hagan. They need someone who's that hybrid forward who can kick goals but also bring pressure. Waitman has tried to show it, but I think he's too small. I think West is that size, that Toby Green size that can go up to the wing but get back forward and kick goals. And I think this guy's in for a big year. And I think if the Bulldogs are to break back into a final spot, he needs to be the one to push them forward, have a 40-goal year. And I think that he can do that. So that's why I picked Riley West. So those guys are my breakout players for 2025. Make sure to let me know who you think are the breakout players or who you think your club's breakout player is going to be in 2025. Make sure to let me know if I'm wrong. Make sure to let me know if you agree with a couple of them. Let me know in the comment section below. But guys, that's basically all we have for today's podcast, for the Banner Riders podcast, episode 96. Sorry it's a little bit shorter, but because my brother's not here, there's not really much else to talk about. And I think most of the world sports stuff, there's not really much to talk about. I mean, the FA Cup, I guess I can mention that just quickly. The fact that Tottenham were 0-0 at 90 minutes after that game, God, Ange, he's very lucky he's holding on to his job. I mean, it's not his fault, I don't think. There's a lot of injuries with Tottenham, but Christ, they were playing a non-league, I think their name was Tamworth, and in the 90th minute, they had a chance to kick a goal. Imagine if Tamworth took out Tottenham. A non-league English club took out Tottenham. That would have been embarrassing. In the end, Tottenham kicked 3 goals in extra time and killed them off the face of the earth. But, God, dude, they was so close to getting demolished. And I saw it on the Optus Sport highlights. Someone was saying, people don't have no clue because they were parking the bus the whole game. Bro, these guys are professional soccer players, so Tottenham, who are getting paid millions and millions of dollars playing up against a League 5 team, I believe. I think they're in the conference for England. Tamworth, I've never heard of them. Even if they were parking the bus, even if they laid on top of the ball for 90 minutes, you should be able to get a goal against a team like that. And it's just the facts, really. I mean, they're ranked so low. They're not. I think some of them weren't even like full-time footballers. So the fact that they were doing part-time jobs and then coming up against one of the top England clubs one of the top clubs in the world, the fact that they still nearly lost that game is a bit embarrassing. So yeah, I just thought that was something I could mention. But yeah, the rest of the other stuff, there's not really much else to talk about, guys. If you want to become a channel member, things are down below. I've been working on some stuff for the streams going into this season. I think we're going to get a little bit more of a newer layout for the podcast. I've got a couple of new bits of equipment, so hopefully everything's just going to start getting a little bit better quality, a little bit better, more editing and stuff into videos. So a little bit of an insight in that. But yeah, if you want to become a member, get behind the scenes stuff, I guess. If you want that, let me know. If you want to watch the podcast live like you could have if you were here right now, then the link is down below. A bunch of other exclusive perks. But that's really all from me. So thank you for watching this episode of the Boundary Riders podcast. If you did enjoy it, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you are over on Spotify, make sure to leave us 5 stars and a follow so you're notified on the podcast every single week. But thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we'll catch you all next week.